So now let's identify whether the user's a host of an activity or going to an activity based on their logged in username. And what we'll do to achieve this, and I'll just try and keep my tabs clean as I go along, and I'll go to the activity.ts, and what we want is some additional properties on our activity that we can set as we receive the activities from our API. And I'm just going to add a couple of extra properties here. One's going to be IsGoing, and it's going to be a Boolean. And the other one is going to be IsHost, and this is also going to be a Boolean. And these are properties specific to the currently logged in user, as in, is the currently logged in user going to this, and is the currently logged in user the host of the event. And what we want to do is set these based on the information that we receive from the API as we load our activities or load an individual activity. So what we'll do is we'll go to our activity store where we're loading the activities, and we'll set these properties inside here. So let's head down to our load activities method. And what we'll do when we're inside our activities and we've received them back from the server, just like we're setting the date, we'll use this to set some additional properties. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to get a reference to the currently logged in user. So just at the top here, just before we go and fetch our activities, I'm going to go out and get the user. Or when I say go out and get the user, I'm just going to set the reference to the user from our user store. So what I can do, I can go through our root store to get to our user store and then get our user from there. And when we've got the activities and we're looping through them, what we'll do is we'll say activity.isGoing equals activity.attendees, and we can use the sum method, which will determine whether the specified callback function returns true for any element of the array. And what we want to find out is if our current user is attending this particular event that we're currently looping over at the moment. So we'll use the sum method to do this. And inside here, what we'll do is we'll say a, and a.username is equal to user.username. And it's not happy because the object is possibly null, because our user object can possibly be null. And what we can do is just specify the exclamation mark after our user here to say we're happy that there's no possibility that this method is going to be called without a user being present. Because in order to load our activities, the user has to log in to get to our activities page. And we can't call our load activities method without being logged in. Well, I guess technically we can at the moment because we haven't locked down the application, but still, we'll just use the exclamation mark to get around this limitation at the moment. And this will set the property for IsGoing based on this, and the IsHost is going to be remarkably similar, so I'm just going to copy this down and change the IsGoing to IsHost. And we still want to check the username, but we also want to check that the IsHost flag is true for this particular user as well. So if both of these properties match, then we know that that user is the host of the activity. And then we'll set this in our registry. Now we also need to do the same thing for our load activity as well. But what we'll do is we'll just extract this into a method in our utility class or our utility.ts file so that we don't have so much code inside our quite significant activity store. So I'm just going to open up the util.ts class and let's export a const and call it set activity props, and we'll pass in the activity and call it of iActivity, And we'll also pass in the user and say IUser and bring that in as well. And inside here, what we'll do is we'll just cut the contents of this and just paste it inside our methods. And what we'll do, and including the activity date, by the way, we'll remove that from our load activities and move that inside here as well. And what we'll do after this is we'll just return the activity. And inside our activity store, what we can do is just say set activity props and then pass in the activity. And what I'll do is I'll just cut this as well and paste that in for the user rather than setting a variable up here. Doesn't make any difference to the functionality, of course, it's just really shifting code out of here into somewhere else. And I'll just copy this particular line and we'll use the same method inside our load activity before we set this in the registry. Or in fact, I'll replace it with the activity date in this case. So what we should find is nothing's broken and we can still refresh and load our activities. But let's just test the functionality, and I'll just add a couple of labels. One to see if the user is the host of an activity, and another one to see if the user is going to an activity. So let's just open up our activity list item. And what we'll do is below the hosted by, I'll just copy this down actually, and inside here what we'll do is I'll just add a label, a semantic UI label, and make it a basic label and color it equal to orange and set the content equal to you are hosting this activity. And just reformat this, and what I'll do is just surround this with activity.isHost and then I'll end it after this, and then I'll just copy this particular item.description and just paste this below, and instead of activity is host we'll say activity is going, and we'll add a not to say activity.isHost and double ampersand, and we'll color this one green and we'll just say you are going to this activity. And if we go across and take a look at our list items now, we should find that for any activity being hosted by Bob, who I'm currently logged in as, we get the orange label and everything's hosted by Bob. Which is slightly confusing. Obviously I'm missing the hosted by name for the user inside our activities because they are hosted by different people. So I've obviously still got some static text there, which is a bit confusing. So let's take a look at, yeah, there it is. Hosted by Bob should be hosted by the actual host of the event. And what we'll do, because we want to get to reference to the attendee that is the host, and what I'll do just at the top here, I'll just say const host equals activity.attendees.filter, and all I'll do here is just say add an expression saying x.isHost, and because a filter returns a new array, I'll just get the first element out of that array, and that should match the user that is a host, and our host is going to be of type iAttendee. And then what I can do is specify, instead of Bob, say host.displayName, and I've just noticed also we've got an item header here that's as a, which means this should actually be a link, so I'm just going to add the link in here as well and say to equals, and this is for our activity itself, so I'll just specify activities / and then activity.id. And we also want to add the host image inside our item image here, because this is the one fully host of the event. So I'll just surround this in curly brackets, and then I'll specify host.image or the static image we're using. Now that should make it a bit clearer when we're looking at our list of activities. So this one's hosted by Bob, and we're hosting this activity, and Bob's the only attendee. And in this case, this one's hosted by Jane, but as Bob, I'm going to this activity. Same for the third one, and we should see some where Bob is neither a host or an attendee, and this one is indeed the case. And if I log out and log in as Tom at test.com and password, then we should find that we only see the highlighted, the ones that Tom's going to. And Tom's hosting this event, that's fine, and going to this event. That looks good. And what we'll take a look at next is, we'll take a look at the buttons in the header and conditionally render these depending on whether the user is the host or is going to one of these activities.